Hello, welcome back to What Problem Are You Solving? The greatest podcast you're listening to right now. Why now? Right now. That's what you're doing. Timing is everything,
Right.
as you're going to find
Now.
out about tonight. Right now.
That's it.
There's
Timing.
no other time.
Yes.
This
be
is,
doing
a,
this.
this is a great start already.
Welcome, Ty. Welcome, special guest, Paul Orlando. Good seeing you.
Good to see you.
And
Hey,
let's
guys, how you doing?
let's go to our usual icebreaker question. Ty, what problem are you solving this week?
Welcome, Paul. Good to see you. Good to meet you. Let me see. What problem am I solving? I am solving how to. I got a personal one and a professional one. How to parent aging parents. How to parent aging parents, because it's what's the joke that says what has two legs, that has four legs and two legs and three legs, and then no legs is your parent, is the human, right? And so we're now down to the point where my dad he's getting older. They're both here. There's 83 and 82, and so we're trying to figure out what's transition. So that's kind of that's the personal part. On the business side is trying to figure out how to balance all these opportunities that are just coming my way. So, for instance, how do I balance?
It's a good problem to
what
have.
could be absolutely. What's my my W-2 life, and what's my my LLC life, and so how do I balance those out? So it's all good. It's all good. Thank you for asking.
Awesome.
How about you, Paul? Problem you solving? Gotcha.
Well, I'm going to come back to Ty's, a problem maybe later on, because I actually did spend some time kind of diving into, I don't know, age tech, or call it what happens with people as they age. But for me, what problem am I solving? Well, I'm going to say that I solved the problem that I actually cannot truly take credit for, but I'm going to mention it. So one of my kids was attempting to learn to ride a bike over the last week. And today it finally clicked. That's why I'm a little out of breath, because I was running, after her. But she went from training wheels to no training wheels just a little while ago, just literally about half an hour ago. So, and it's so funny because before able to ride a bike and after riding, able to ride a bike is two different things. It's not like you need to say I forgot how to do it. I have to take that refresher, course, every year, because I always I can't do it anymore. You just get it. And so it's amazing to see you went from, you could do that for 5 feet to now you just can go forever.
That's
awesome.
awesome.
A good feeling.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
That is awesome.
Yeah.
That's great.
John, what are you doing? What are you working on there, bud?
So I know we just dipped our toes into June here, but I heard a new term that just captures this essence of the anxiety of this season. And so it's a neologism, a new word that was made up called Maycember. I don't know if you've heard of this before. So Maycember, not unlike December, where there's that big rush to the Christmas holidays or the winter holidays. Now we have the rush to the end of the school year. So all of the concerts and award ceremonies and plays and last minute homework assignments and extracurricular sports all being done, trying to rush to get to early June. So that's where we are. That's the problem I'm trying to solve, is how to balance, 4+ kids and all their activities and be there, be present, and do all the things all at once, be everywhere at the same time. So I'm in that Maycember feeling right now, trying to just make it to the finish line. A week and a half, and we'll get there. So that's certainly a lot of problems I'm trying to solve all at once.
Gentlemen, I don't feel sorry for you anymore, because mine are 22 and 20. And guess what, guys? You're on your own. You haven't figured out how to ride that bike.
Rub it in, man. Rub it in. Because I would do the same for you. Don't worry.
I know. No,
awesome.
Stop it.
Let's dive into this. This is really good. I'm really excited to talk to Paul today, because we do a lot about how to do good customer discovery, how to capture the essence of your business model and things like business model canvases and all sorts of canvases. But there's one piece that we often leave out. That's the temporal aspect. That's time. And so the timing can affect things greatly on how successful you are, the opportunities you're given, and potentially even profit and revenue. So we're going to dive deep into a lot of good research that Paul's done, and his years of experience coaching other clients, to share a little bit about what's this whole thing about why now? What does timing have to do with entrepreneurship and your business model? So, Paul, take it away. Give us a little overview of what your fancy is.
Fantastic. Yeah, thank you. I love talking about this topic. So this timing topic, or this why now question, it's one that I would hear, it would come up again and again. And so my quick background is I have built and operated a number of different startup accelerators, different parts of the world, different themes to them, sometimes a specific technology, sometimes an industry, sometimes more of a mission-based theme. Day to day, I work at the University of Southern California. I teach in the entrepreneurship department, and I also run the startup incubator on campus. And when I looked over, and previously I had a startup, as well, where I learned some of this the hard way. But when I looked over, these different programs, different companies I've worked with, like these hundreds and hundreds of startups that I've seen up close, the funny thing is you start to see like similar ideas come again and again over the years, right? And there's this old quote from Mark Andreessen where he said, when it comes to timing or startups, it's more of a question of when, not if. It's almost like if you have an idea for something, maybe it's going to happen. Maybe it's not today. Maybe the time is too early, but we might see this in 10 years, 50 years, 100 years. And so I started to really think about that. And when I started to just get interested in this, because I don't know about you guys, when I hear something come up again and again, like, oh, timing's really important, like be able to answer this why now question, I never saw anybody go deeply into the topic. And I just became obsessed with trying to learn about this. And my process was, first a lot of reading, just a lot of like looking at companies that I'd worked with, like across multiple portfolios. And I started doing this as a workshop as I was, kind of like getting my thoughts together. And it was a combination of all of those things and then writing about it and sharing some of the early things that I was writing, where I got to, I guess, a way of thinking about this topic that I think is helpful for people. But I'll mention a few parts of this, and I'm happy to kind of like dive in or kind of, discuss anything there. So the first thing I'm going to say is this is not like trends prediction, or this is not, say, looking at like an analyst report and saying, oh, well, market research says, this industry is going to grow by, 55% by the year 2030. And, therefore it's, a good time to, invest or something like that.
Okay.
And, so I actually, when I take people through this process, I actually want them to go and do some of this work themselves and actually think about, what are what I call timing drivers that are relevant for them, and how do these drivers affect their business model. And so the first thing I'll just leave you with, and maybe we could discuss, is when you think about timing, Adam, you think about timing, you really need to think about how your business model is affected. And essentially, there must be an improvement to your business model. Otherwise, you don't have a timing advantage.
Oh, interesting. Yeah, because when we do like business model canvases, we when we teach that, we often emphasize that, if you change one piece of your business model, you need to think about the trickle effects that come with that, right? Because you tweak one thing, it's not just this one thing in isolation that may make it better or worse, but you have to think about all the other, value stream kind of things that come with that. And timing is absolutely one of those. Can you give an example of one of those?
Yeah. So first thing I want to do is, so I teach as well as run these different programs, and the majority of the students I teach are business students. And so I always just like to get terms straight, because it's okay to use different definitions as long as we know what we're talking about. But one of the fun things I always like to do on the first day of class is ask people, what is a business model? I have never gotten the same response twice. It's which is okay. But I also sometimes think well, if we're just kind of making it up in the moment, then let's actually get to some consistency. So I've actually come to like this one. It's from Ashmoria, just 3 parts to it. And so if you think of the canvas, it's basic. So 3 parts being value you are creating for your customers, which is basically the value proposition piece of the business model canvas. The value you are able to capture back from your customers, which is the revenue piece. And then that cost of providing value, which is the cost side.
Great timing. We just talked about that last week. So I love it.
Fantastic. Fantastic. So to have a timing advantage, you're going from a state of, okay, here's the legacy setup where businesses that are already doing something like this have this kind of business model, to, okay, I've noticed something as the founder or as the entrepreneur. I'm able to actually impact one of those areas of that business model favorably. So this is going to be advantageous if I decide to do this thing now. I'll give you an example that I like to use this example because it is so big, but very few people have heard about it. So I used to work at AT&T, and AT&T, when it had Bell Labs, invented the transistor, cellular telephony, fiber optics, satellite, telephony, all of these amazing innovations that came out of that corporate lab, which, the best days are behind for things like that, I suppose, or hopefully they'll be reinvented in some way. But that's when companies took this really long-term view. And so video telephony. So we're all on a video call now. And I was curious in my research, when did the first video call, happen, or when was it technically possible to do it? Even if it wasn't yet a business. Any guesses when that was?
It's a very old technology. It's not a new technology. It was the 1940s or 1950s or something.
40s, 50s, somewhere around there.
It's an old technology. I can't remember, but I know it's old. So
the earliest that I knew of it, at least in a commercial setting, was this project that AT&T had with set desktop devices, which had a screen and audio. They demoed it in 1964. I'm interested if there is an earlier one, actually, that was, or at least viable. But 1964 at the World's Fair, and then had a commercial rollout in 1970 in a couple markets, and basically pulled the plug on it in 1971. The issue was really, a couple issues, but the main one that I think caused him to give up after spending the equivalent of $6 billion, adjusted for inflation, and years of research, was just way too expensive. And also, you have that whole network problem. I have one, but you don't. So what value is it? And I'm the only one who has it.
Right. Yeah, you need that network effect. Mm-hmm.
You do.
It's interesting because I had a thought as you were talking about that in terms of timing and the impact to your business model. And so I just wrote a really quick like XY, and along the X is timing, and on the Y is value. And somewhere it's not a one-to-one relationship, because that's not how good business models work. They have to be sustainable, right? You can't have, if you're familiar with with Osterwalder's, and Ash does the same thing, cost per unit value. That's how John and we came out of a very non-business environment where we use the canvas, and so it was very mission oriented. But it works. If it costs you more than the value you create, stupid. Nobody does that except sometimes the U.S. government, except for now. But no politics aside. Well, if the cost and the value extracted is a one-to-one, you have a public service, right? Might be, but don't be disappointed if nothing extravagant happens.
Money in, money out.
That's it.
Yep.
You want better than 1 to 1.5, because that's just a lifestyle change. You actually want 1 to 3. Jensen Sang said, I know I'm screwing his name up, the CEO of NVIDIA said, with AI, it's like 1 to 1,000. That means his prediction is like it'll be a 1 to 1,000 ratio. And so, having said that, what's your thought about Kodak versus Fuji? Because Kodak had the same thing, I would suspect, in your timing of the value proposition of your VP versus your offer versus the timing.
Yeah.
Impact on the business model.
Yeah, I actually looked at that example in the book, or wrote about it in the book. So that's it's a really interesting case of Kodak, or a new engineer at Kodak, I believe in 1975, invented the digital camera. And it was, I'm going to get this off, but wrong, but it was like something on the order of, it was a 0.01 megapixel image that it could take. And it was like 15 minutes to save the file. And big, like a camera that was like, if you've seen like the cameras from like the 40s, big heavy thing like that, right? And so he develops this just in his own time, and he shows it to somebody who, like at Kodak, who says, we're not going to show that to anybody. That's like going to kill this business, right? That's how you destroy your career over here as a new engineer and just got hired. Like you're going to get yourself fired, right? So nothing happens with it. About 10 years later, Fuji comes out with some early digital cameras that really are not very good, and then sticks with it. It's another 5 years. Like I remember a friend of mine, I want to say in sometime in the late 90s or mid 90s, he had an early digital camera that actually used like a 3.5 inch floppy disk, and it was like, I can store one picture on this.
I remember those. Yeah.
He had this like huge duffel bag of floppy disks, and I was thinking like, this is really not what you should be. You're like backpacking around the world. This is probably not the best, to store your pictures. But so like a couple of things there. Kodak was just dramatically early there. So they could have stuck with it, but it's going to be more than a decade before they can actually do anything with this tech. Oh, look at this! I love how you're pulling up. And then I don't know if you can find it. Like I'll look for it. Find an image of the actual Kodak one. But the other thing is so Kodak, both for business model reasons and also for reasons of I just found the Steve Sasson. I'm going to send you this link. You find that so Kodak had this business model issue, of course, like going back to that discussion about like, oh, don't show this, new engineer. But also, like, to be able to invest in that, you are like significant. Like you're putting in a decade, 2 decades, 3 decades. Yeah, look at that. Look at that.
You can barely see it. It's microscopic.
So cool.
Wow.
And so like I love the story for all those reasons, but also, it does make you think, okay, like what would have had to have been different about the organization of Kodak for them to say, actually, we're going to keep this, it's going to be kind of in the back burner. We're not going to let it die completely. We know that eventually film is going away. We've heard about these computer things. They seem to be getting some popularity. I wonder, like, at what point would it make sense for there to be a digital camera? And they could have gone through thinking about that.
See, I find that fascinating, right? Because when you think about timing, you're usually thinking about market timing, right? You're thinking about, okay, I need to sell this toy before it launches in Christmas, right? Or I need to, like we talked in the green room, like you don't sell Halloween costumes in November, right? It's just the worst time of the year to sell it. So, but what I'm hearing you say is more of internal corporate or business model timing. Like, are you ready to transform and adapt? When that could be, it's kind of, instead of trying to respond to external forces, it's more of an internal look. Are we ready to adapt to change? And if so, when?
Yeah, the three big, I guess, pieces to think about when I can take people through this process. So, like, first you have this discussion or evaluation of what I call timing drivers. So in the case of the Kodak example, it might have been, okay, we're going from a world where the only way to record an image is film and paper to, oh, now we can actually, it is technically possible to have a digital image. How do I think we're going to go to, that world in 1975 where, wow, a really huge, expensive camera is very slow and the image is, not high quality, to one where we're actually approximating what we get on film. So, like, there's some thought to how that, what I call a timing driver, in that case, it's more of a technological one. How do you like think about how that's going to unfold? And so in that case, it might be a Moore's law related one.
Yeah, I was thinking about, can you project or predict based on market trends and technology advances, where, not maybe necessarily where you will be, but at least where the market will be, not your competitors will be within a certain time frame based on technological advances of that industry, right?
Right. That second piece is that business model piece. So there is a point at which, hey, it's possible. Like, we have the capability to build the thing. People get value out of it, but wow, it's just way too expensive. We can't charge enough. Or, we could keep the cost down, but we're going to lose money on every unit, right? And then that third piece is really, okay, as an organization, are we better off waiting and watching what others do and then entering later on? Are we actually the ones who can move fast and enter early? Or I should say, those are two little different things. Are we ones that are comfortable entering early? Or are we ones that can just wait and then enter really quickly when there is an opportunity?
Yeah, it's another interesting parallel, because it's not so much trying to focus on your innovators and your early adopters from a user perspective, but is your company an innovator or are they a follower, right? It's because you often hear about, first to market, right? Captures the market. Not always true. I'll give you an example. I remember when HD DVD came out. If you've not heard of HD DVD, there's a reason, because Blu-ray was the competitor and won the market. HD DVD, I was such a nerd when it came out. It was a far superior protocol. For example, at the time, they required all HD DVD players to have a direct connection to the internet. And this was still early kind of internet. And so they made that requirement up front. All HD DVD players needed to have that for the interactive things. And you could, submit, play online games and stuff with your HD DVDs. Meanwhile, Blu-ray, the first spec of Blu-ray, didn't have that in there. However, so they were a later market entry. However, they had the entire Sony back catalog of movies, right? And so they had content where they had a weaker technology. So the timing was actually better for them to be a follower, not be first to market, so they could learn. And guess what? Shocker, Blu-ray specs eventually caught and exceeded the HD DVD specs.
Yeah, that first mover, question. So I remember from the .com days, everyone was talking about, like, we're the first, the first one to sell, like, can openers, on the internet. Therefore, we're going to dominate, this market, right? And that hype, as I understood it, at the time, and like, afterwards, that hype came from this paper that was written about first mover advantage. 1988, paper.
Wow.
Academic paper about first mover advantage, and was cited for all of these, .com era startups that were, getting funded. And I had never read the paper. And so as part of my work, here I went, let me actually go and read this, because, at least most of the time I hear about first movers as not being the winner, right? They're like, they might have been an innovator, but they didn't, or they might have, invented something, but they didn't actually like innovate in building a sustainable business. So that paper does not say first movers are the ones to win, or more often the ones to win. It says instead, and this is like where, you could say like, oh, I'm just going to pull quotes that are advantageous when I'm raising money, right? But instead, like the two professors who wrote it said, okay, the times that first movers win are when they can either lock in customers. So they get those early customers and they just make it difficult for them to leave. There's some kind of customer lock-in, and like there's examples of companies doing this well or badly, but like they like, it's so painful to like, now like, get the next, like implement like the next, the next replacement, whatever software I'm using. So you could lock in customers, or when you could lock out competitors.
Oh, interesting.
So that might be more IP related, or process related, or some other resource, even a regulatory, issues. So if you can't conceivably do like one or both of those, then you might actually say, okay, I'm going to wait a little bit. I want to see how something like this new thing is going to play out.
I'm fascinated by this idea of waiting a little bit. So I've been thinking about your timing drivers. I try to write them down kind of colloquially for me. So, business, technology, global, probably customer, the ones that are, as I was kind of putting them together in my head. But the thing that I hear you saying about when I do and when I don't show up and when do I make my move sounds like strategy to me. Right? It feels very strategy driven, because the science of strategy is when to do something and when not to do something, making a choice and making an informed choice that's just not like, stick your finger in the air, Kentucky windage. I think the wind's blowing this way, but really having a sense of what's happening and taking the pulse of it and adding it to your equation. So when you make an informed choice, you're like, oh, this is what we're doing. It's just not willy-nilly. One of the things that I try to, especially with organizations, is what's your innovation strategy, if you have one? How's that connected to your technology strategy, if you have another? And what's your business strategy? And they are like the triumvirate of what you're trying to build out. So you can say, I'm not just building a business just to build a business. I would include, at least for the organization I'm working with now, what's your data strategy, particularly nowadays? Do you have a data strategy? Where I'm working at now, they're collecting data. I'm like, to do what? If you're just collecting data and it doesn't inform where you're going, like just a thought about, even if you don't use it to make a planned like change in your business, you're like, oh, I'm just watching what's coming across the transom. Like, what are people interacting? What's that data telling me that may give me your timing issue around, I need to make a change here? And so that was one thought about strategy. The other one is this idea, are you familiar with a concept called blue ocean strategy? Do you know Blue Ocean?
Yep.
Yeah. So I really love Blue Ocean because how do you decommodify the relationships with your customers? One way that I think about that is, I think Adam had said, what one of my favorite movies is Moneyball, right? If you got rich teams, you got poor teams, you got 50 feet of crap, then you have everybody else. You can't play their game if you ain't got that money. You can't be a Yankee if you ain't got Yankee money. You got to rethink the problem. And so I'm curious how in your world, my son got me into Doctor Who, right? The Time Lords. How are you managing how are you pulling the levers as a Time Lord to understand when you're consulting with these startups to say, go? I'm watching pulling the levers and I'm watching you go, and you should go now and do something. I know there's a lot of metaphors that I threw out, but that's how my brain works. But just a thought.
I'm going to see if I can pull in any TV references as well. I'm probably not. But so I'll give like a partial response to that, I think. So I think what timing does is it actually, so rather than what completely makes sense, so like look for a problem and then solve it, right? Which is your theme, here. What it can do, what timing can do, or thinking about timing can do, is say, people were not having this problem. There isn't a customer today. However, we've noticed this opportunity that we can actually build for. We couldn't have done it, at least in a sustainable way 5 years ago. But, we're from this industry, or we're following like this tech, or we're actually aware or an influence on what, social trend or regulatory regime, is changing, or like we're watching this new crisis that is emerging now is actually for us something that we can solve. So like there's something that's like, I think, a little different about it. And so I like this. There's this talk that Alan Kay, gave. So he was at like Xerox PARC, back in the 70s. And he gave this talk about looking for opportunities. It basically said like, problem solving, it's not enough. We can actually instead think about, okay, what is that future state of the world that should exist or we want to exist, and then build for that rather than going on the present state of the world.
Yeah.
And he talks about when he was at PARC that they had put a lot of resources into the team. It's like a small team, like 25 people that were like building like the Altair, like like all this new technology that came out of there, like another corporate lab example. And he said, okay, if we're building the technology of the future, we need to work with the devices of the future. So they were working on, computers that were, way ahead of their time, because each one was like adjusted for inflation. It was something like, $150,000, machine, right? That was their their desktop.
Yeah, that's interesting. First thing that comes to mind when you said that was, like when the Microsoft Xbox was being developed, right? They would send, once they kind of locked down kind of the architecture, what they wanted to build, they would send developer kits, which were really souped up, way over engineered development kits, right? So that they had enough wiggle room to develop games on, and then they could actually optimize their game to actually run on the hardware when it launched, right? So they had to give them more beefier development kits so they could start playing in advance of knowing, like you said, that, hey, 2 years from now, Moore's Law and all, the actual console will launch at a cheaper price, but it'll sort of resemble this thing that we've invested a ton of money into up front, so that we catch the market at the right timing. That's fascinating.
Yeah. Like one of the other examples about that, when it comes to strategy, but not Doctor Who, is so another AT&T example, which, I mean, again, I like it because early in my career, I was there in a voice over IP, group, and one of the stories the old timers would tell was about how AT&T in the 80s, it had this is before, I think, before, or like, as the company was, being broken up. So like, 84, 85, the company had developed a lot of the tech behind cellular telephony. And this is back when, like, if you've seen the first movie Wall Street, when, I guess, the Michael Douglas character, he's got like the brick, size phone, like the old, like a Motorola phone. So, that was a phone. Yeah, exactly. It's like putting up like a big gulp, to your ear. That phone, which, Motorola, made, cost, adjusted for inflation, I'm going to get this approximately right, but like around 10 grand, 30 minutes of battery time, those to talk time. So like you're going to be plugging that thing in, if you're really spending any time on it. And expensive, like I forget what the per minute charge was, but like a couple dollars, per minute. And so AT&T brings in this outside consultant to study this problem. And the question is, by the year 2000, 15 years from now, what's the market like for these things? Should we keep investing in mobile telephony, or what? And, the consultancy goes out, they do this whole study. And in my research, I went and actually, I was able to speak to someone who was in the boardroom when the details were presented. I was also able to speak to someone who actually had a copy of the presentation. And so this is another fascinating thing, because for us, it's easy to look back and say, well, I mean, obviously, of course, this is a huge market. Like, obviously, you go into it. And instead, what happened, and I think you'll like this because it involves surveys. The consulting company goes out, they survey, I want to say something like 5,000 consumers and 3,000 like business customers. They come back with, I'm told, from the presentation, like a 95% confidence, level on their results. And they say, get out of this market.
Wow.
It's too small. By the year 2000, you're not even going to have 1 million customers. So for AT&T, that's nothing. Like, it's like you're going to have like 900,000 customers. It's too small of a market. The only people who want this really are maybe truck drivers and traveling salespeople. So sell off your networks, get out of the market, which was what AT&T did.
Wow.
Only to buy it back at like multiples higher, like in the 90s. Mm-hmm. And what they didn't really think about was, well, how is this huge brick phone going to change? And when all of a sudden it fits in your pocket, mm-hmm. and it's pretty cheap, and there aren't many dead zones when you're, traveling around the city. What's that going to change about, human behavior? And that is tough to think about. Like, it's kind of like, I remember the first time I saw someone talk on a mobile phone, and I'll never forget this. It's like, I saw them, like this guy, like walking by, and this was probably like mid 90s or something. Like, he was like walking by and he said, yeah, I'm on my way home. I'll be there in 15 minutes. And I remember thinking, that was like, why didn't you just go home? 15 minutes? Who cares? What are you doing?
That's funny.
And yet, like, that became like a very common, like, yeah, of course, like I'm running 3 minutes late. Like, right? Like, so, that expectation of like, oh, well, people behave a certain way when it's a fixed line phone, like on the wall or on your desk. That changes when all of a sudden you carry this stuff around.
It's fascinating too, because what I'm hearing you say too is that you'd have to do a little bit of future casting for future market timing or future opportunities. And yet we as humans are awful at predicting things, right? So you're placing certain bets, right? That's the strategy part. You are choosing to invest in something that may pay off huge later, or it could be, you know, the next pet rock. You don't know. Pet rock was great, and then now try to sell one, right? It's going to be a flop. So it's just fascinating. And also what I'm thinking a lot about based off of that conversation is exponential growth, where it's not so much linear, but things like Moore's law, or things like how AI has advanced in just a very short time frame, that it's really hard for the average human, the average project manager, to wrap their head around where something's going to be. Because just like when COVID came around, it's like, well, it can't spread that fast. You're like, no, it's an exponential effect, not a linear effect. You can't. What do you mean in like 3 weeks it's going to take over the whole world? Like, yeah, in 3 weeks it will exponentially grow. Same thing is true where when you hear Jensen Huang talk about like how AGI could be here in like as short as 3.5 years, right? And you're like, well, but they're just dumb little, autocorrects right now. Like, well, they're doing video now, they're doing images now. So just ride that wave. You can see where, yeah, we could actually replace most human intelligence, in a very short time frame. Mm-hmm. And so, yeah, how do you prepare now for those kind of things?
Yeah, it was interesting, John. I was thinking about compression, right? That what you're speaking to is either time or technology compression. And so there's an accelerant effect that we're experiencing now. What was it? ChatGPT 4.0 had 1 million users in 5 minutes or something. I mean, the amount of the compression, right. Yeah. The work that I do independent of this podcast, we talk about the geography of the world has shrunk because of things like Zoom. So you can have what used to be asynchronous meetings can now be synchronous. And the only thing that keeps them from being truly synchronous is that we have a 24-hour clock, right? There are 24 time zones. That only thing that keeps us from being synchronous. And so the thought that I had, Paul, I just wonder if you could talk about this related to this, is how do you teach curiosity? How do you teach search? How do you help these students and the founders that you work with stay out of the trap of certainty, the trap of the immediate, to expand their aperture? In design thinking, we talk about the double diamond of you have a thought, you expand it, you close it, then I've come to some conclusion, I need to expand that. There's a great book that we refer to at times, written by I just lost his name, it'll come to me, but the title of the book is Questions Are the Answers, right? So how do you keep people engaged in the search, in the question, in the job to be done, versus looking for the moments of timing? Thank you. That's it. Hal Gregensen, right? Because my suspicion is that as they're looking for the black swans, Talib's black swans, or looking for these moments of, if you just would have asked, like the certainty of the phone, right? I love this idea of the mobile phone, that they did not think, well, what if, and stop trying to engineer the thing, trying to engineer the value, and said, so what problem are people trying to do? Right. I want to let somebody know that I'm running late for work because I'm running late, not for work. I'm running late coming home because I love them. Okay, cool. Talk to me about that. Right. Because now you have a completely different avenue to help solve problems. Because if it's not rooted, I just did a piece of work with a group of mission-oriented folks out in California. I had two 90-minute sessions with them. And they took a quote and they posted on LinkedIn. They said, a lot of times, you can tell I just talk my ideas out. But it was something to the effect, stay problem-centric, because then it'll lead to a good solution, right? And so if we're looking for these timings, we're looking to, my sense is not you, but a lot of the founders that I work with, they're looking for these events to prove that what they're building is the right thing. Oh, stop it. Don't do that.
Yeah.
Stay curious, man. Stay curious.
Yeah, that is a great point. And I think that's always going to be a balance because, I mean, the great thing about founders is, I mean, some of them, they just believe in this thing so much. And actually, like, even with like any kind of evidence that they uncover, that you uncover, that you show them, like, they're just doing it. They're passionate about it. They just want to do that, you know? And I actually think that's okay. Like, they want to spend their time in this. They just love doing it. For them, it is like,
go for it.
They're not doing it because, oh, this is going to eventually be a sustainable business. They have other reasons. And we kind of depend on people like that because once in a while, that actually completely works out. Once in a while, it does work out. But of course, you also wouldn't want a founder who you could like really like strong arm. You wouldn't want to like, force somebody to do something else. So I like the approach, or what works for me anyway, is the approach of what I call tricking people into learning. So, I don't know that you can, elegantly teach these things, but I think you can give someone the opportunity to, be exposed to something new, or to hear from somebody else who went through a similar situation, or who, like, basically give them the opportunity to figure this out on their own terms. So I don't know. I suppose that's my best response, because I've also struggled with that. Like, and these, for the most part, when I'm doing this timing work, they're not students. They are actually, there are founders, or they might be a corporate that is trying to evaluate like an innovation portfolio they have, and like they need a filter on where they're going to put resources. So, it's a bit different in that respect. Or they are a bit more, at least in theory, committed to being process, driven on this. But I think, just having that mix of different approaches lets you be lucky once in a while. Oh yeah, that idea that everybody thought was crazy, actually turned out, right? Once in a while, it does happen. But I kind of also think about it as, we could all spend our time doing lots of different things. Thinking about that timing question, I think lets you say, because I can spend my time with lots of things, I think I want to spend it on the areas that are most likely to pay off. And again, timing is one way to say, this, I've got a lot of ideas, projects I'm working on, or places I could, invest money, time.
Yeah.
I'm going to say, okay, the time is ripe for this, to happen rather than that. And I'm going to go for, this one.
Yeah. You just blew my mind, because the lens that I'm filtering this through is I'm kind of envisioning this as a portfolio of opportunity costs, right? Because there are, back to my earlier point, there are bets you're going to place. A prudent, organization would not go all in on one thing unless, they were stupid, right? Or they had almost 100% certainty. But otherwise, they can try to do this future casting. And again, human beings are bad at it. But what if, you said, we have these 10 options on our plate, and we have to balance not just resources, but also, the potential ROI of these 10 individual things. And like, we have to run some like Back to the Future events where we're hopping in the DeLorean and trying to see which of these 10 timelines is the optimal timeline, right? You kind of have to spread your bets, diversify your portfolio, right? To make sure that your future casting has some sort of payoff, because otherwise, you're proceeding at risk.
Yeah, absolutely. And that, that future casting, or, I think, Adam was, mentioning, TAM, always leads
Yeah,
you
total
astray.
addressable market.
Right. And I always found that TAM, SOM, like things to be very problematic, because
Why is that?
if there is a timing advantage, that market size is going to change radically.
Interesting.
Like TAM, SOM is best fit for when like you don't expect much to change. You can actually like look up some analyst report that says, oh yeah, this market is this big, or it's growing 3% a year, like and then you could like filter it down to like the market you're going to address. But like an example on that is when like the rideshare companies were becoming popular, like 2010, 11, 12, like around then, there's this finance professor out of NYU who was, it still is, like he's famous for doing company valuations. And he looked at Uber back, I believe it's 2014, because I think last year I wrote like the 10-year anniversary kind of comments on his original valuation. So he does this valuation of Uber. He's like, this company is completely overvalued. There's no way. It's like, I forget, 17 billion valuation back then, like 10, 11 years ago. It's like, maybe it's a third of that. And here's why. And so he did what in a static market makes sense. He said, okay, Uber is basically getting a portion of the taxi market. That taxi market is, this big. It only grows at 2% a year. It's very stable. So they're going to get like some fraction of that, and that's worth this. And this other valuation, like, it makes no sense. And then there was a rebuttal from one of Uber's board members and investor, and he laid out the argument for actually why the taxi market is not appropriate for a company like Uber. And I think the reasoning applies to timing a lot. And so it's basically, if you go back and look at the market for horses in the United States in the year like 1900, 1910, okay, I think the peak in the US, it was like 25 million horses. So you say, okay, so these cars are coming around. I've seen these, here and there. The market for cars is really just whatever the market for horses is now. Like if we're going to replace them, like that's it. Like 25 million horses. Mm-hmm. Why would I need like 2 horses if I was getting by with 1 horse for everything I need to do? So it's 1 for 1. And what it ignores is, well, horses, it's like a stable market. Like the horse, in 10 years is pretty similar to the horse of 10 years ago. But cars go through this,
nice.
They go through evolution like
mm-hmm.
on an annual basis. Like they're getting better and better and better, cheaper. They can drive faster. They're more comfortable. Like all of that, like that radical improvement, especially that was happening in the early days of that automotive market. So all of a sudden, you go into like this new automotive market that is like much bigger than what the horse market was. It's the same thing with rideshare. It's not that, oh, I only take an Uber in the situations where I would have taken a taxi. It's, oh, well, I'm not going to rent that car. I'm just going to take an Uber. I'm not going to drive home after having a couple drinks. I'm going to take an Uber. I'm not going to take the train or the bus or walk. I'm going to take a Lyft. Right. So it changed the customer behavior. Because all of a sudden, like they had this opportunity, they didn't necessarily have a problem with transportation. Or if you spoke to somebody back then, no, I don't have a problem. I've got my own car. I can rent the car. I can walk. I can ride a bike. I can call a friend. But now they had this other opportunity that
yeah. So it's interesting. I'll say one thing and then I'll hand off to Ty. We had a coworker of ours who said that. Solving problems only creates more problems. They're better problems, right? And so, solving the taxi problem actually created more like, oh, I can actually use this for other purposes, that I didn't even think of before. So it's like now I'm freeing the human to have higher level problems, if you want to think of it that way. Ty?
Was that the Nixter that we're talking about?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
So it's interesting because I've been trying to follow Paul your because how you're creating your argument, and I think in terms of diagrammatics. And so I'm wondering if this idea of timing, like finding the specific opportunity in the market from a combination, and I was tempted to go. Do you know David Bland's work, Feasible,
Oh,
Viable, Desirable? So
yeah,
he was on.
I heard him on your podcast
There you go.
a few weeks ago. Yeah.
Yeah. So I was going to say something, but I'm glad that you know him, and I want to have him. I know we want to have David Black back on, but there seems to be there's like this Mobius of a triangle where the vertices stop it, John. We for almost a year was like, and wait for next week, David will be on. Wait for next week, David will be on. But is there a like it seems like there's an emerging image in my mind of technological advances in technology as one vertex, change in marketing conditions as another vertices, and customer optimization as the third vertices. And so as you're as a business trying to figure out where's the technology, what's the change, stability, because you talked about stability, but I'm thinking in terms of this idea of the change in market conditions, and then this optimization on the customer side. Like, I want to optimize my experience. I want to optimize my time. I want to optimize my money. I want to optimize my relationship to others. Is that a space where, for our listeners, they could start to think about, oh, it does for me. I'm just going to say for me, and I can't speak about your work, about your theory, but it feels like that's where you're going with this. Is like, there's technology is going to change. The market is going to change at some conditions because solving today's problems lead to higher order, another set of problems. They're just more sophisticated, more nuanced. And then the customers need to optimize time, money, resources, whatever. Just a thought. Do you have any, I mean, I laid out a lot because I had one more thought, and it's about AI, but we're not going to go there. We'll bring you back on for another time for AI. But that was where it felt like you were going with some of this as I was thinking this through.
I mean, I love it. And I think this is, this whole timing question is flexible and open enough that you can approach it in lots of ways. I did it a little differently. So when I talk about these timing drivers, there's 12 that I track.
Okay.
It might only be like one or two that are relevant, in any situation, or might be a handful of them. But these are things, we mentioned some of them, like a technological change. And this is probably happening, by the way, outside of your impact or your control. Like, you're noticing this is happening. It's not like you are also inventing the new tech, right?
Right.
The technological change. You notice a social or behavioral change happening. And it's kind of the question, well, if this is this little niche today, is this going to be big, in the future? Those are very difficult to predict, I'll say, compared to something like a Moore's law kind of change, right? Mm-hmm. There's a regulatory or a legal, change also. And some companies might have influence there, but others just have to respond, or they're keeping tabs on what's going on, and they say, like, you know what, I bet this change is going to happen in the next year. We should be ready, or this is going to impact us in a certain way. There's an installed base one. So this is, we mentioned Uber. We mentioned the old video phone from AT&T from 60 years ago. This is one where some new timing advantages are unlocked because there is this this installed base that you, as the next business, can ride on top of. Like Uber did not also make the iPhone or like a GPS, enabled phone, right? Mm-hmm. So, but once that was out there, or once those phones were fast enough to do turn-by-turn directions, they could ride on top of that. There's a crisis one, right? So if you are quick enough to be able to respond to it, you can take advantage of that. Mm-hmm. And those are like, I won't go through all 12.
Oh, I love it.
5. And then that second piece is, hey, Adam, I always like to look at how the business model is potentially going to change because of some new timing advantage that's coming out. So in other words, what used to be expensive or too big or too slow now becomes cheap, small, really fast.
Right.
And that's going to impact, okay, we actually charge for that, or it's cheap enough for that business model to be sustainable.
Nice.
Or that the customer is getting more value than previously. But so like I think of it like that. Like in what I wrote, like I kind of take people through how they can think about those timing drivers, how they can do what I call a why now session that kind of like takes all these pieces and puts them together. And then, how they can, actually encourage that to be challenged and, use that as another way to look at their thought process. But I don't know, like one other thing I'll just mention is when I wrote this, I noticed like similar, what I call patterns coming up again and again. So there are, different situations across time where you see, okay, different industries, different businesses, but they're kind of taking advantage of the same thing. And as an example, like I have this one pattern that I wrote about called the hermit crab, which, it's like the one clever name I was able to come up with, but it's this effect that you have where you have this huge investment in something, something new, or it's like something becomes overbuilt. And so for me, this was like bandwidth in the .com era or the telecom bubble, era. And then like all this like infrastructure investment, because like, we're going to keep growing at this immense rate, like, and it doesn't happen and there's a crash. But then a little while later, these other companies realize, oh, bandwidth's really cheap now. Like, I'm going to be able to build a business, on top of that, and then like do like cable telephony, or like other any of these other like kind of like post bubble internet businesses that would have been too expensive if they had to actually like raise the investment to deploy like undersea cables.
So you can move out of your old business model into your new business model. It's the same business model, just a little bit bigger because of timing. Yeah, that's great.
This feels very, very evolutionary. This feels very Darwinian in some ways.
The funny thing about, so I love that comment, because the funny thing about it, because I was just thinking about this whole topic for a while, and there's an interesting book called Sleeping Beauties, which I actually cited in the book. And forgetting the name of the author now, but
John will get it.
So it's about evolution, and so like the author talks about some of the species that are the most successful today. Successful meaning like there's the most of them on the planet. They kind of like had this period, maybe for millions and tens of millions of years.
Is that
it? That's it.
The Sleeping Beauties, The Mystery of Dormant Innovations in Nature and Culture by Andreas Wagner.
Yes. So like he gives us this example, which I thought was fascinating, of like, so the most successful, according to like his metric, species on Earth today, or like, maybe, like a genus, today, is grass. Because it's like, there's all these different like species and subspecies. It's like on every continent, maybe except Antarctica. But it didn't start out like that. Like for like tens of millions of years, it was like this really niche thing. And then because of like temperature changes, different like evolutionary niches, like animals that were like able to spread, like the seeds were able to actually like digest or not digest the grass leaves. It like spread and spread and spread. And so it wasn't that like grass had this idea, hey, like we're going to be the most successful like species, like we have to do these things. And it also wasn't that they started out super successful as a species, but instead it's like, okay, they were kind of like this. Yeah, this is a great comment. Like grass figured out a way to make humans cultivate and protect it, Adam says. it's like, okay, they had these conditions, and then outside of their control, other things in the world changed. And then all of a sudden, it's like, oh, the time is right for us.
Yeah.
We're going to grow. Yeah.
The time is right. Awesome. Well, I want to be respectful of your time since we're talking about why now. I'll give Adam the last question of the night.
I'll take
and
it.
then we'll plug your book.
So how is that different from luck, right? Like, is it just
Ooh, good question.
is evolution, because you are just putting out like whenever we get back to the evolution question, it's just random mutations, some of which are successful, and it's kind of like this diversity. That wasn't my other comment. And I was in an Uber while the Uber conversation was happening, so that was kind of fun. I was trying not to be too gimmicky with the whole thing, and some of those use cases we're applying. Yeah, how do you get around just luck and because I was almost going to tie this back to our book. Like, you just buy the whole industry? Do you buy all the founders and just wait? Like, how do you strategically take advantage of that, of the fact that that it might be luck? And so then how do you? Yeah, I think.
Yeah, the grass example is much more of a luck, situation. So luck will always be a part of this, I think, but you can start to abstract away some of the other things. So, if you have like multiple teams, really smart and hardworking founders, if I kind of say like, okay, they're kind of comparable in terms of capabilities and how dedicated they are, but they're working on different things, I'll like evaluate them in terms of timing. Okay, like this specific product or like, set of like, problems they are like working towards, like I'll say, if I can evaluate that and through a timing lens and there's an advantage, that I think is going to hit, I'm going to say, I think they are more likely to be in the right place at the right time than one of the others.
Yeah. As the famous Stoic philosopher Seneca says, luck is when preparation meets opportunity. And I think that's a good summary of tonight's episode. So, Paul, you've been talking about this book. Where do we find your book?
Oh, there it is. Yeah.
Why now? How good timing makes great products. Or you can just search Amazon for Paul Orlando, or the title of the book, Why Now? How Good Timing Makes Great Products. And I know I'm going to pick one up because this whole conversation has been fascinating. And I think you've laid out a good framework of categories of timing. And I think, to your point, it's an underexplored area that certainly impacts all business models. And so I really appreciate you coming on and sharing your thoughts with us.
Happy to. Love the discussion and all the comments and ideas.
Awesome. Well, we're going to have you back another time. I know that's for sure.
That's right.
Who else should we talk to?
Ooh, great question. Have you spoken to Tristan Cromer?
He's in the queue. Yep.
Mm-hmm. All right. And you already spoke to David Bland, I know. I might have to think about it. Actually, I might recommend a colleague of mine, Jeremy Dan, who does a lot of corporate innovation work.
Oh,
I'm happy to put you in touch with him.
I appreciate that. That's good.
That sounds
That's
great.
good. That is good.
Well,
I appreciate you,
so
Paul. I appreciate the you've given me a lot to think about in terms of what timing looks like and how I actually go and work with folks, because I've always thought about when is it right, when is it different, when is it enough to create new value. So appreciate it.
Thanks, Ty.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, and have a good night.
All right.
Until next time.
Thanks, everybody.